students of class 6, welcome back again to a new chapter. Today we shall learn a poem. This poem is from lesson number 19. You can find this on your textbook, page 113. Page 113, 113, lesson number 19. I will tell you how the sun rose. Now this poem is a poem written by Emily Elizabeth Dickinson. I will tell you how the sun rose is a poem in which our poet will talk about sunrise as well as sunset. But before we go into understanding the poem, let us first understand our poet Emily Elizabeth Dickinson. Now, Emily Elizabeth Dickinson was born on 10 December 1830. She was an American poet born at Amherst, Massachusetts. She was a prolific poet. However, only a few of her works were published during her lifetime. Amahi poet theme ta ahi wanga hi adam lai sunga cho a poem ho hi ana sel tup che na publish ana bolo chiza cho ama hin la ya cho kuima in an he jong ne he be lo phau jong min phau be lo lai he thi zowa bo hung phau he ma some of her works were published during her lifetime, but it was not until the year 1955 when a full compilation of her works, ama poems ho yo si hi a thi zowa hi anau nu in a hin mu do a ina aruma ko na hi It's a poem you see to book na compile abol over the poems of Emily Dickinson ti book minzo asa over. It's also ama poem ho si hunki publish pan eh. So it was only after her poems or her book of poems, the poems of Emily Dickinson was published, that her work became to be well known. And in most of her poems, Dickinson usually talks about deep spiritual and writes in a style in which she kind of describes how she lives her life every day and how she is very much unaware of what lies beyond the horizon, what lies what lies when you're death. And her style of writing is very unique. It is not like anybody else's. She tends to talk about nature and the environment that surrounds her, but added to that, she also talks a lot about life as well as death. Now, most of her poems were not named. I mean, anazilo tamso poem ho poet ho hin poem ho azi paten a title ho hi api inom hin hiwanga. With Emily Dickinson, she hardly gave a title to her poems, and which is why a poem ho hi tamso hi a first line ho a first line ako na ho a title kin pezi hai. So the same goes with our lesson today, chapter number 19. I will tell you how the sun rose. Now the title of the poem was not originally there when the poet herself wrote this poem. However, in the course of time when it was published, the first line of the poem has been given as the title of the poem itself. So let us first read across the stanza. I will tell you how the sun rose. First stanza. I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. The steeple swam in amethyst, the news like squirrels ran. The hills untied their bonnets, the bobblings begun. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. So in the first stanza, our poet mainly is talking about sunrise. Now, she talks about how beautiful the sunrise is and the sort of things that happen during the time when the sun rises in the morning. So she starts off the poem by saying that I will tell you how the sun rose, how the sun rises. So the poet here is telling us that she will tell us about how the sun rises in the morning. A ribbon at a time means ribbon hi so okay it's more like when you play around with ribbons, you tend to sort of spread it out in open spaces. iti say dam khaw tabang hiya na ribbon nong ki tham le le the he na chi tabang banga chu sunrise to hi ama hin all la kahin thlap ding athusim hi kahin sei bi du he iti jing kho hung wa azi am iti ni sa hung so zi am chi thusim hi ka sei bi du he ti he na. And then in the third line she says the steeple swam in amethyst. Now steeples means the towers of you must have seen in most churches even around our place, the churches usually have this sort of pointed tower achung lang ko zoomzi chuna in chung lang ko chilai ko steeples ti hai na. So the steeples swam in amethyst ni sa hong so do pha ten la chun dan chu hichini sa so na ama in amu ni sa so na mun ko ma chu vadung khat hidi hin na ale vadunga ko na ni sa hong so do phaten the light, the rays of the sun hits upon the water body, the river, and then from there a sort of a light reflects onto the surface of the steeples, the towers of the churches, and gives out a very beautiful color of that of the amethyst. Now amethyst is basically a precious stone, it's a gemstone, but it tends to give out a reddish purplish color. So the poet says that when the sun rises in the morning and the rays of the sunlight hits upon the surface of the church, it reflects an amethyst color, the color of an amethyst, purple, reddish purple color. After that, she further says, the news like squirrels ran. So the news, what news? The news that the sun has risen. Na hichi news to just like squirrels, it ran across the town, it ran across the village. So basically, squirrels every time you see a squirrel, it's basically moving everywhere and trying to run away from you, moving very fast. So when the sun rises, the news of it rising, just like newspapers you get early in the morning, no, every other household gets newspapers early in the morning. So the same way, just like that, even the news of the sun rising spreads across the village very fast and quickly. Again, the poet talks about the hills untied their bonnets. So bonnets are basically it's a sort of a hat. If you can look into the picture here, the children, the little girl here is wearing a bonnet. It's more like a hat which has ribbons to the end of it, and that you tie across your chin. Masanglaya chapangho ko aniaw lai phate no la tulai lukhu kitup chel chenai ki khu sa jivin hi honong ki khu vin hei wa masanglaya chu pon ho ko ribbon aninga ga ki khitna alu ga ki tom na khalang lai wa hi ki khit zia lukhu a ki mansa ji hena chitabang banga chu the hills untied their bonnets ti aile lukhu ki khu pa hi see, when the sun did not rise yet, it was all dark. The hills were all dark. But as soon as the sun rose, it almost looks like the hills were opening up their hats and taking in the rays of the sun, and therefore there was daylight. Na masanga chu thima lukhu ki khu pel hon athim ta banga ga sei cho metaphor aman he na chilaya he personification he na hills ho chu mi hi min lukhu ki khu ta banga ko se he. It's more like a personifiable he in hills ho chu lukhu an ki thlap ta bang he ti chana nisan an kho te le chun amasa hills ho thimleng lung ho chu nisan an kho pha ten le hungwa do vaita. This line is what is known as personification. Personification hi literary device hai na. You will see that this poem has pretty much a couple of personifications. And then the poet further talks about the bobblings. The bobblings begun atile bobblings ho hi vacha hai na. Usually it's vacha ho hi America abu ki mu hai na. Ama hi American poet hai chizach America amu ho agam kaidan ho thusim azi de chu het sa hai na. So the bobblings they have begun what have they begun? So these birds have begun singing mahoi singing birds hi vina they tend to sing a lot of songs kiti la ho banga la sa ako hilot ako ew yung ging zi ho just like song he ta ki gelehin. So these bobblings, as soon as they see that the sun has risen and has spread its rays upon the tower of the church, and also the hills are all bright now, they begin to sing. And then the poet says that then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. So when the poet sees all these things happening across the village, like the rays of the sun turning purplish, reddish, and then the news spreading across the village, and the hills all brightening up to opening up to the daybreak, and also the birds, the songbirds singing. So when she sees all these scenes, she tells herself that yes, that must have been the sun. Nisa hong so tai, the sun has risen. Tihi kahe ti na ako na. So pretty much in the first stanza, the poet Emily Elizabeth Dickinson is talking about the sunrise. She explains all sorts of things that happen when the sun rises in the morning. Now, let us read the second stanza. But how he said, I know not. There seemed a purple stile, which little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while, till when they reached the other side, a dominie in grey put gently up the evening bars and led the flock away. Now, like we said, in the first stanza, the poet has been talking about how the sun rises. But in the second stanza, the poet is talking about the opposite of it. The opposite of sunrise is sunset. So here in this few lines of the second stanza, the poet will now talk about how the sun sets. However, the poet starts off the second stanza saying, but how he set, I know not. So in the first stanza, she has described a lot of things that happened during sunrise, as the sun rises in the morning. But in the evening, when it sets, how it sets, where it goes, what all happens, she does not have much idea to it. Na til ha het be set lo sunset to ti masat so. And what little she knows, she puts it across saying, there seemed a purple style. Izo a amethyst color hi chana zinka sunrise. So isay ibang ba amethyst to purplish he ti chana purple chet hu hilo na reddish purplish hi izo ha dup lo lai chana zinka ako ai wanga ko nila lang ten hung dup che ve te ni sayong ko na chija chu purple color tabang style ti ahile style hi masanglay chu masanglay kitile adida American ho hin ma ho in farmland li ta nei jivin a farmland ho hi fence phaticha sim je fencing phaticha sim jiu na fencing wai sang ta sim jiu, so that farm abol namun wa chu a herd a cattle ho na bong awa leo dang sakol ho awa jiu gam kamlin ta chu me ho tu ji wa sa ho yong awa jiu he na cho chu alut lo na dingai fen sang ta bol jiu he ale fen sang ta bol chu ama ho he alut ngai kit ji he na ama ho no akal chu ngai ji he asan wal te na chung kal le ha sai cho ma ho dinga chu, which is why step ho koi jiu he na kai rak ta banga khu akido ji wa khat veile khat langa chom do wa khat veile khat langa ji wa. But fencing to hi ahile to a cattle ho alut lo na dinga bo sim ya na it is step ado chu na fencing chunga step anga buwa khat langa pa na khat lang chi na dinga anga pau chu style kiti he na. So the poet says that there seemed a purple style, a style ho ayong chu purple color hi dai tile nisa chun an ho hoing so nisain a race a kona hui mu theiwa mun hoi meu si thil hoi mu theiwa thil hong wa ji chana chitabang banga chu hi style chunga a a khot pa chu a dup thlatai ti chu ipizia ham tile sun chu a set good pha na a hlum good pha na now which little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while so the yellow boys and girls le mi him chu yellow ki di lo pi chu na ai wanga ipizia yellow ti ham ti a hile when the rays of the sun hit upon the boys and girls who seemed to be apparently playing around that place where she also happens to be there, she sees that the rays of the sun cast yellow color on the boys and girls, which is why she says little yellow boys and girls. Sila chapang niaw cha cha ho chu nisan an kho pha wa chu color chu yellow thimin achi tai ti chu na hichi izo a step iti pau chu hichi boys and girls ho hi they were climbing all that time na all the while all that time till when they reached the other side. They were climbing it up and they were crossing it to the other side. So when they reached the other side, a dominie in grey put gently up the evening bars and led the flock away. A dominie, there can be three people. Dominie, first it can be a priest ho indunga pastor hong ko dominie kitizi or second it can be a headmaster schoolmaster na school dunga headmaster ho ko oza ho ko na ama hoyong ko hithe or third he shepherd hithe na bong sing hoyong hithe he chi dominie hi khat pen hung hit he let's see which one it would be now literary ise ya hi le hichi dominie hi dan hi aman asay dana hi hichi chapang ho chu hichi fence ha aga akal chu wa khat lang ahungge iwa hele pasal khat ahungin in grey tile ama chu nisa chu ahlum ten le khon mi him ho shadow tabanga ki muzita chuna ilim u hi ki mu thei ku hi ki ke to jong le thim zep ji ta chuna ho thim zo pha ten le khon chija hu a dominie in grey mi khat hi ahungin ama chun put gently up the evening bars adile fencing gates ahung kha in and let the flock away flock tile chapang ho tin he na usually dominie le flock hi adi ta cho dominie hi shepherd and hi le flock hi a cattle hi de na bong ho loi ho achin ho cho hi de he ai wanga chu chilaya hi chapang te ni zo hi achin da na se yu he na ma hin hi chi chapang ho yong hi fence a hin kal chu wa khat lang hungge i wa chu pitiam te a hi le chipa chu hungin kot hung kha in a fencing kot gate hung kha in chi chapang ho chu aki hoi phei tai ti chana ipizia ham chi ti ki na hi le hung thim pha ten le khon inu ipa te ho jong khon hung ji wa hung ta ki chi pha ta lo pi chu in hung lu ta ti wa hung hoi le jiu chana no hong ne he diu chana just like that literal meaning if na hi le chi chu sei ne he na mi khat ahungin mi khat chu let's say he is the shepherd or he can be the priest or he can be the schoolmaster but which penam ju clearly he pon he wang just understand that there was somebody who came in he looked like a dominie he was a dominie and he gently closed the gates of the fencing and took the children home and took them away so this is just a literal literal translation of the poem. However, there is a deeper meaning to it. Poet ho hi, this is very fancy about poets. They tend to do things like this. Mawahin a poem khat hin ziu vinten a poem is simahil tua I poem yong it looks like the poet is talking about sunrise and sunset and how the animals or the birds are singing or how the children are going home something like that but actually amahin ipise hamtila sunrise first stanza hi what the poet actually means is that of birth na mi hong pin khu now sena na hung so khona na hung pin thlau hu chu sunrise tabanga te he mahin sunrise tabang he ti chila hi chi hung mi hung so le khon ipitiam all thil tha an he na thil tha hin bola aso yong kho mi tam ta in news ke na news ke til khat ki se ama te naw chu so tai ama chu ping tai ki ta ki he to chu zo le chun mi tam ta ki pa te na ki thlai le ki hung len ki ja ki chom le ki thlai le hin kho no manu chuna niaw lai chu chichu sunrise to te he abana second stanza sunset hi ipito te hamta hele mihim athi hona death to ate he na death hi ipitiam tile mihim athi phaten ipitiam ke hezi to lo pichuna athi le thusim ki chai ngai cho chija chu but how he said I know not ati chuna ama hin mihim thi zo wa chu ipiti di ham huilai chi da ham iti umzi am ahin khu athi zo te na chun huilang ge di tam ipi abol dam ti hoi ma cha he lo ja chu I know not ati na aten le mihim ho he tam zo hi ithi phaten le hin pastor hon ei vu chuna Christian ho i khat dana ta san na ho ke pu ke man cha dan wa he cha chu domini ti hi chelaya hi khat pen hi the he ka ti chuna khat langa isei ki na hele pastor ham khat no hi theina flock away ti ala pastor hon ei vu ji bangwa chu chi a domini comes in and let the flock away tina. But for your understanding, just consider the fact that in the first stanza the poet is talking about the sunrise. She talks about how beautiful the rays of the sun are, and she talks about how the color is amethyst. Amethyst is basically a reddish purplish color, and she tells us that the news of the sunrise is spreading across the village like squirrels running here and there. Na squirrels so atlai le le gang chal chala nisa khu ahung so do hun veleu chun agan ha gan chuna mun khat na pa na mun khat hlung loi chale he na chitabang banga chu like squirrels ran ati he na. And the hills untied their bonnets. Hills hoyong cho thimbeng bunga no muchu nisan an kho pha ten la wa so kyai ta na. And nisa hong so ten la chun the bobolinks start singing. Bobolings are American songbirds. They tend to sing songs. So as soon as they see the sunrise, they start to sing. And when the poet notices all these things, she says to herself that must have been the sun. First stanza. Second stanza achu the poet talks about how the sun sets. Maini pisayam sunset chu purple color hitaiti abula chu purple reddish purplish color tia. Second stanza achu sunset chu purple color momo hitaiti na. Aban le hung thim zo phaten le when the rays of the sun hit upon the boys and girls, it casts a color which is more like yellow in color he tichuna chiza chu yellow boys and girls atikit ama ho hin pina ball wam chipena. What were these children doing? They were climbing all the while across the fence, the stile, to reach the other side. And once they reached the other side, a domini in grey, domini chipizia grey heti tai ho thim ding kon hi bhana chu alim chu kitchen thei ta lo na thimai ta chu chiza chu domini in grey, a shepherd in grey, comes in and closes the gate of the fence and lets the flock away, takes these children away. So that is your poem, I Will Tell You How the Sun Rose by Emily Elizabeth Dickinson. Hichi poema dinga hi na bol diu chu chilai blue color a ho si hina text a yung a meaning so okay hin word meaning ho si hi na zi diu. You will all write the words given here. They are all in blue in color. First word is ribbon, steeples, amethyst, bonnets, bobolinks, style, domini, put gently upon the evening bars, and last ahi flock. So si hi word meaning ho hi. A word na zi diu a meaning ho laya so okay na textbook mo so hong leo chun meaning so okay chuna. So si chun na kinam do diu notebook ana zi diu aban na sim diu So that would be your lesson number 19, our poem I Will Tell You How the Sun Rose by Emily Elizabeth Dickinson. Thank you.